The late morning sun streamed through the wide windows of Iron Eagle shooting range, catching the polished steel of rifles and pistols lined neatly on the racks. The smell of gunpowder lingered faintly in the air, a scent that made some uneasy and others inexplicably alert. Conversations mingled with the occasional pop of shots fired in the back lanes. The place hummed with energy, a mix of casual enthusiasts and serious marksmen testing their skills. Through the automatic sliding doors, she entered. There was nothing remarkable about her at first glance. A simple black hoodie, blue jeans, and worn sneakers made her blend effortlessly with the ordinary crowd. Her hair was tucked beneath a loose ponytail, and she wore a pair of dark sunglasses, not out of vanity, but as a subtle shield from the world's attention. She moved with the kind of quiet confidence that went unnoticed until it couldn't be ignored. People glanced her way as she walked past the counter, where the attendant, a young man with a baseball cap perched backward, gave the obligatory nod. There was a casual chuckle from a nearby group of men in their 20s as they noticed her. "Oh, this is going to be fun," one whispered, smirking. "She looks like she just wandered in from the coffee shop. Bet she can't even load a magazine properly." She didn't respond. She never did. Politeness, calm, and an aura of complete self-possession were her armor. Without haste, she approached the nearest lane, placing her small bag on the stool beside her. The other shooters watched, some with mild amusement, some with curiosity. Her hands were steady as she unzipped the bag and carefully removed a sleek, black rifle. The weapon seemed almost too refined, like an extension of her body rather than a tool. As she assembled it, each movement was precise, practiced, perfect in rhythm and intention. She didn't need to speak, her actions spoke volumes. The men who had been laughing earlier leaned closer, trying to sneak a look. One nudged the other. "Hey, maybe she's actually serious." "Doubt it," the other replied, still smirking. "Look at her. She's too calm." "That's weird. Normal people don't act like that." She ignored them completely. She never gave her observers the satisfaction of acknowledgement. Her focus was absolute, her posture relaxed but controlled. She tested the rifle's weight, checked the sight alignment, and loaded a magazine with practiced ease. It wasn't arrogance, it was assurance. Years of experience didn't need to be announced, they simply existed, and anyone patient enough to notice could see it in the subtle movements of her fingers, the way her shoulders settled, the calm in her breathing. The range instructor approached, clipboard in hand, giving her the standard rundown. She nodded politely, asking a few quiet questions in return, enough to demonstrate comprehension without attracting unnecessary attention. The instructor, used to novices or show-offs, couldn't help but feel a flicker of unease. Something about her didn't fit the pattern of an ordinary shooter. As she moved to the firing line, the room seemed to shift subtly around her presence. Other shooters instinctively gave her a little more space, not out of fear, but out of subconscious recognition of someone who commanded respect silently. The air itself seemed to tense as she raised the rifle, aligning it with the target downrange. Her first shot echoed sharply. A single crack that was precise, deliberate, and utterly clean. The bullet hit the bullseye, not near it, not around it, but dead center. A few heads turned. Some stared, disbelief creeping onto their faces. The men who had mocked her earlier froze mid-laughter, their smirks faltering. "Beginner's luck," one muttered, but there was no conviction in his voice. She didn't answer. She wasn't here to talk. She was here to perform, silently, without fanfare. She adjusted her stance slightly, taking another shot. Bullseye. Again. Every movement smooth. Every shot unerringly perfect. A hush fell over the immediate lane. Even the instructor raised an eyebrow, jotting something down with a furrowed brow. Her calm, silent demeanor, paired with near-perfect execution, created a paradox that drew attention without her effort. She was a quiet storm. She paused for a moment, breathing evenly, surveying her surroundings through the dark lenses of her glasses. There was no arrogance, no need for validation. The mockery, the whispers, the doubt, it all bounced off her like water on stone. She thought back, briefly, to the years before this, the training, the missions, the moments where calm focus was the difference between life and death. Yet she didn't carry that weight here. This place, with its casual shooters and careless assumptions, was simply another lane in life where she could exist without explanation. A young man beside her muttered something to his friend, clearly agitated. I don't get it. How is she? That's impossible. Shoo, his friend said, glancing nervously at her. Just watch. And watch they did. Each shot she took was a statement, one of skill, control, and absolute mastery. No one could read her expression beneath the sunglasses, but her presence alone communicated an undeniable truth: she was not to be underestimated. As the session progressed, whispers grew louder. People started talking quietly among themselves. Who was she? Where did she learn to shoot like that? Questions that would remain unanswered, at least for now. She packed away her rifle with the same quiet precision she had used to assemble it. No flourish, no show, just efficiency. She stood, slung the bag over her shoulder, and walked toward the exit. The sunlight caught her again as she moved through the sliding doors, leaving the room in a quiet aftermath. The men who had mocked her still lingered, stunned into silence, staring after her retreating figure. For all their bravado, none of them could have imagined the story behind. The quiet black woman who had just walked through their lives, and left them questioning everything they thought they knew about skill, focus, and power. Outside, the world continued as usual, unaware of the storm that had quietly arrived and passed through its midst. She disappeared into the ordinary streets, blending with the crowd, carrying her lethal expertise as silently as her very presence demanded. The quiet arrival was over. But the impression she left? That would linger far longer. The shooting range buzzed with its usual mix of echoes, laughter, and the occasional sharp crack of a perfectly fired shot. But the atmosphere shifted subtly when she entered her lane, a quiet disturbance that nobody could quite place. Eyes followed her movements, some curious, some mocking, some secretly impressed. The group of young men from the next lane, the ones who had noticed her first, leaned casually against the counter, smirking as if the mere sight of her was already a joke waiting to happen. "Look at her," one whispered, nudging his friend. "She's way too calm. Like, boring calm. Bet she can't even hit a target." "Ha! She probably won't even load the gun properly," another replied, laughing softly. "I'd pay to see this." Their words were loud enough to drift across the lane, carrying easily to her. She didn't flinch, didn't even glance their way. Her hands worked with steady precision, assembling her rifle as if it were second nature, a familiar extension of herself. Each movement was deliberate, controlled, and utterly confident. "Hey, lady," one of the men finally called, his tone dripping with faux friendliness. "Need some help? Or should we show you how it's done?" He waved a hand toward his own rifle as if the gesture alone could intimidate her. She looked up, finally, her dark sunglasses hiding any trace of emotion. Her lips curved into a small, polite smile, a smile that carried none of the amusement, none of the arrogance that the men expected. "Thank you," she said softly, "but I think I've got it." A ripple of laughter ran through the group. "Oh, she thinks she's some kind of pro. This is gonna be good," one muttered, nudging another. They pulled out their guns with exaggerated theatrics, attempting to show off as she continued calmly preparing her own lane. The instructor walked past, giving the young men a stern glance. "Keep it professional," he warned, though his words carried little weight. The men chuckled under their breath, convinced that their performance would entertain and perhaps embarrass her. She took her stance at the firing line, her posture relaxed yet precise, every detail meticulously perfect. The men leaned over the divider, whispering, snickering, and attempting to rattle her with jokes and teasing remarks. "Ever held a real gun before?" one asked, loud enough for her to hear, though he expected no answer. "I have," she replied softly, her voice calm and measured, betraying no emotion. The words, so simple and unassuming, hung in the air. There was no boast, no arrogance, yet the weight behind them was palpable. It was a statement, quiet but unshakable. Her first shot rang out with a crisp, clean crack. Heads turned. The bullet didn't just hit the target, it split the bullseye in half, perfectly centered. The room seemed to pause for a heartbeat as disbelief crept across the young men's faces. "What? How?" one whispered, his smirk fading, replaced by an uneasy tension. She loaded another round with effortless precision. Another shot, another perfect hit. Her rhythm was flawless, her focus absolute. The men's laughter faltered, replaced by a creeping realization that they had underestimated her. "You're really good," one admitted reluctantly, his earlier arrogance dissipating. This isn't luck." She didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Skill, patience, and focus spoke far louder than any words could. The whispers grew louder. People from nearby lanes began to glance over, curious about the quiet black woman who seemed impervious to mockery yet lethal with every pull of the trigger. Her presence was magnetic in a way that wasn't about charm, it was about command, quiet and undeniable. Another man tried to regain control of the narrative, raising his voice mockingly. "Bet you can't hit the 10 ring 3 times in a row," he challenged, thinking he was daring her to fail. Her response was calm, understated. She simply aimed, exhaled slowly, and fired. Bullseye. 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 Each shot more precise than the last, each one eroding the smug confidence of the men who had mocked her just minutes before. A hush fell over their lane. The smirks were gone, replaced with awkward glances and silent frustration. They had assumed weakness. They had assumed incompetence. And now, they were confronted with a truth far more intimidating: she was untouchable. The instructor, clipboard now forgotten, watched with a mixture of awe and concern. He had trained shooters for years, seen talent, seen arrogance, but rarely had he witnessed the sheer, understated mastery that radiated from this woman. Every motion, every shot, every decision was precise, deliberate, and unerring. She packed her rifle with the same calm precision she had used to assemble it. The men, now humbled, could only watch as she slung the bag over her shoulder and moved toward the exit. She didn't glance at them, didn't smirk, didn't say a word. The quiet confidence in her stride left a lasting impression, a silent rebuke that needed no words. Outside, the sunlight hit her face, warm and unremarkable, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Yet inside the range, whispers continued. Questions circulated. Who was she? Where did she come from? How could someone so unassuming wield such lethal skill? The men who had mocked her stood frozen, replaying the moment in their minds. Their laughter, so confident just moments ago, had vanished entirely. Respect, grudging and silent, replaced it. And somewhere deep down, a hint of fear lingered, a realization that appearances could be deceiving, and that the quietest person in the room might just be the most dangerous. She disappeared into the ordinary streets outside, leaving behind a story that would linger in the minds of those who had witnessed it. Mockery had failed, assumptions had crumbled, and a legend, quiet, deadly, and unassuming, had begun to take shape. The shooting range returned to its usual rhythm, the echoes of laughter and gunfire blending as if nothing had changed. But for the few who had dared to mock her, nothing would ever feel the same again. The line of targets stretched down the range like a silent challenge, each paper circle a test of precision, focus, and nerve. She stepped up to her lane with the same calm assurance that had unsettled the men who tried to mock her. Her dark sunglasses hid her eyes, but not her intent. She exhaled slowly, feeling the familiar hum of readiness settle into her bones. The room buzzed faintly, guns cocking, bullets hitting metal, the low hum of conversation, but it all felt distant, like noise behind a glass wall. She wasn't here for attention, she was here for the craft, the art of the shot, the perfect alignment between mind, body, and weapon. The first man who had tried to challenge her muttered something under his breath, a mix of disbelief and bravado. "Let's see what you've got, then," he sneered, loading his gun with exaggerated showmanship. He didn't notice the subtle tension creeping into his movements. Confidence had been his armor, now it was cracking. She didn't speak. She didn't flinch. Her fingers moved with controlled precision, checking the sight, adjusting her grip, aligning her stance. Then, with quiet authority, she pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, clean, sharp, and perfect. The bullet hit the center of the bullseye with such precision that a faint shiver of astonishment ran through the nearby shooters. Murmurs of disbelief spread like wildfire. "What? How did she?" one man gasped, unable to form a coherent sentence. She simply exhaled, reloaded, and fired again. Bullseye. Again. Bullseye. 3 shots, 3 perfect strikes, each one a statement louder than any word she could have spoken. The men who had mocked her were frozen. Their confidence had evaporated, replaced by an uncomfortable awareness that they had severely underestimated her. One of them, shaking slightly, attempted a nervous laugh. "Beginner's luck, maybe." She didn't react. Luck had nothing to do with it. Every shot was deliberate, calculated, precise. Each pull of the trigger was a combination of muscle memory, focus, and a quiet understanding of angles, wind, and timing. The room had grown quiet. Other shooters peeked over, curiosity replacing their casual concentration. Some leaned closer to witness this anomaly, a quiet, unassuming black woman delivering near-perfect shots with no flourish, no drama, just skill. The air itself seemed to hum with the unspoken realization, she was exceptional. The challenger, desperate to regain control, moved to a closer target, thinking perhaps distance was her weakness. He aimed, fired, missed. Another shot, another miss. Panic flickered in his eyes. Every shot she took hit the target dead center. It was no contest. A subtle flashback flickered through her mind as she adjusted her stance, a memory she buried carefully, one she rarely allowed to surface. Training exercises at dawn, missions in hostile terrain, moments where a single shot meant life or death. That discipline, honed over years of dangerous assignments, was now manifesting effortlessly. Yet there was no pride in it, only focus. Only purpose. The next shot echoed across the range. This time, it wasn't just perfect, it was almost artistic. She split the bullseye cleanly, a bullet carving a line through the exact center of the target as if defying probability itself. Gasps erupted around her. Even the instructor paused mid-note, eyes wide. "Unbelievable," someone muttered. She's not normal." She lowered the rifle momentarily, scanned the room, and saw the faces of those who had doubted her, mouths agape, eyes wide, disbelief etched across every feature. They had come here thinking to entertain themselves at her expense. Now, they were the ones being schooled, silently and irrevocably, by someone they had assumed would fail. Another challenger stepped forward, a man who had remained silent until now, thinking perhaps he could quietly prove himself superior. He raised his gun, aimed with careful deliberation, but the moment stretched, tension thick in the air. She didn't flinch, didn't react. She simply waited, calm as a stone, letting him make his move. He fired, and missed. Again. And again. Frustration began to show on his face. His earlier smugness had evaporated entirely. Meanwhile, her next shot rang out, precise, clean, unerring. The target shivered as the bullet struck its heart. Every onlooker could feel the contrast, the gap between skill and assumption, experience and bravado, quiet mastery and noisy incompetence. She reloaded with her usual calm. Her breathing was even. Her hands were steady. Her eyes, hidden behind the dark lenses, were sharp and alert. She could have stayed here all day, repeating shot after shot, but this was enough. The statement had been made. Mockery had been shattered. Doubt had been replaced by awe. The room seemed to exhale collectively, a shift almost imperceptible but undeniable. Those who had mocked her had learned, in the harshest way, that appearances could deceive. A soft-spoken black woman, unassuming in every way, could hold more precision, more control, and more lethal skill than anyone had dared to imagine. She lowered the rifle, packed it with deliberate care, and stood. The quiet confidence in her movements contrasted sharply with the stunned faces around her. She didn't boast. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. The first shot, and the ones that followed, had spoken for her. As she slung her bag over her shoulder and walked toward the exit, the sounds of the range seemed almost distant, as if the world had momentarily shifted around her. Behind her, whispers continued to circulate. Who was she? Where had she learned such precision? How could anyone be this calm, this perfect, this lethal? She disappeared through the doors without a glance back, leaving the room in stunned silence. The echo of her shots lingered longer than the sound itself, a quiet testament to skill, patience, and hidden strength. The first shot had been fired. The first shock had rippled through the room. And for those who had underestimated her, nothing would ever feel the same again. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of the shooting range, casting long, golden streaks across the polished floors. Inside, the hum of activity continued as shooters cleaned their rifles, chatted with friends, or packed up for the day. Yet the echoes of her presence lingered like a shadow. The quiet black woman who had arrived earlier, seemingly ordinary, had left a mark far more significant than anyone in the room realized. No one knew her name. No one knew her history. To them, she had been an enigma wrapped in calm confidence and lethal precision, a phantom who walked among them unnoticed until her skill revealed her true nature. She sat in her car in the parking lot, the rifle case beside her, unassuming and neatly closed. The world outside her tinted windows was ordinary, people walking dogs, teenagers arguing over skateboards, cars drifting lazily through the streets. Yet her mind wasn't on any of it. It never was. She had a past that demanded vigilance, precision, and discipline at every moment, and it was impossible to leave that behind entirely, even in mundane places like this. Her fingers traced the edge of the rifle case, a subtle ritual of reassurance. It wasn't superstition. It was habit. Years of training, missions, and high-stakes operations had taught her that every detail mattered, that calm control could be the difference between life and death. She had spent nights in hostile terrains, where one miscalculation could end a mission, or a life. And yet, here she was, performing the same precision with the same focus, now on paper targets rather than human adversaries. Flashbacks flickered behind her dark sunglasses, brief but sharp. She remembered the deserts of a foreign country, the heat pressing down like a weight, her sniper rifle balanced perfectly against her shoulder as she waited hours for a single opportunity. She remembered the silence, the absolute silence that only a true sniper could endure, punctuated by the faintest sounds, a branch snapping, a distant vehicle, the subtle movement of a target. One shot. One chance. Perfect execution. Survival depended on it. Even here, in this ordinary range, that discipline persisted. She could feel the air, the distance, the faint vibration of the rifle as she prepared each shot. Every target became a calculation: wind, distance, angle, timing. It was almost second nature, an extension of herself that she neither flaunted nor concealed. Her calm demeanor was not humility, it was mastery. Inside the range, whispers had begun to circulate. The men who had mocked her were still talking in hushed tones, replaying the scene again and again in their minds. "I can't believe she just," one muttered. Another nodded, still staring at the spot where she had stood. She wasn't just lucky, she's unreal. She had overheard none of it. She never did. There was no need for confrontation. The effect she had on people was enough, sometimes intimidating, sometimes inspiring, but always unmistakable. She didn't need to assert dominance. She simply existed in a space that she had mastered, and that mastery spoke louder than any words could. A part of her, a small but persistent part, savored the irony. People assumed weakness because of her appearance, her soft voice, the ordinary way she carried herself. They never anticipated the experience hidden beneath that calm exterior, the countless hours of training, the missions that demanded perfection, the focus that had been honed to an almost unnatural degree. And that misjudgment, as frustrating as it could be, was useful. It gave her leverage, an advantage, a veil behind which she could operate undisturbed. Her phone vibrated gently against the leather seat. She glanced at the screen but didn't answer. Contacts from her past, old colleagues, former operators, intelligence networks, sometimes reached out, but she was careful to maintain her life in parallel, ordinary on the surface, extraordinary beneath. This duality had become second nature, a shield and a tool all in one. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, inhaling deeply. Even in stillness, her body remained alert, trained to notice the slightest shift in the environment. She could feel the weight of her rifle case beside her, the cool metal of its locks under her fingertips, the faint vibration of the air through the windows. Every small detail mattered, even when it seemed insignificant to others. Flashbacks returned, missions in war-torn regions, covert extractions under the cover of night, snipers who underestimated her, opponents who had thought themselves invincible. She had learned patience there, the art of observation, the discipline of silence. The world often underestimated those who did not boast or glare, she had used that underestimation as a weapon countless times. And today, at the shooting range, she had done the same. A small smile touched her lips as she remembered the expressions of the young men who had mocked her. Arrogance and ridicule were temporary shields, they always crumbled when faced with precision and skill. She didn't revel in their failure. She simply accepted it as part of the equilibrium. Those who assumed superiority without evidence often learned the hard way. She opened her eyes and surveyed the range from the parking lot through the windshield. People moved as though nothing extraordinary had occurred, yet their movements carried hesitation, awareness, and curiosity. Rumors would spread. Questions would circulate. And she would remain an enigma, untraceable, silent, deadly. That had always been her way. Her training had taught her one fundamental truth: control was everything. Control of the mind, control of the body, control of perception. She had honed that control to the point where even the mundane became tactical practice. Every glance, every movement, every reaction was measured. Even the casual act of walking through a parking lot carried awareness. Even a simple trip to a shooting range was an opportunity to test herself, to refine her skill, to remain invisible yet formidable. As she started the car, the engine's hum was a quiet accompaniment to her thoughts. Today had been a test, not of life or death, not of mission or extraction, but of patience, poise, and precision in a controlled environment. She had passed, but not with arrogance. That wasn't her way. Mastery did not need to boast, mastery simply existed, undeniable to anyone patient enough to notice. She drove slowly through the streets, blending into the ordinary rhythm of the city. People passed, oblivious to the lethal expertise that had just walked among them. She didn't seek recognition. She didn't crave validation. Her skill was hers, silent, unseen, unmatched. And yet, somewhere deep inside, she knew the world would continue to underestimate her. They always did. That ignorance, that assumption of weakness, was both a shield and a weapon. One day, when circumstances demanded it, they would learn the truth. And when they did, it would be absolute, undeniable, and irreversible. For now, she remained the quiet observer, the silent expert, the unassuming black woman whose eyes had seen far more than anyone could imagine, whose hands had delivered precision where it mattered most, and whose skills, unmatched and unseen, were ready for whatever came next. She parked at a small, unremarkable cafe, her mind still running through calculations, angles, and trajectories. Even in casual spaces, she couldn't stop thinking like a sniper, like an operative, like someone for whom focus and awareness were not optional, they were survival. And perhaps, in that awareness, lay the greatest secret of all: the world never knew what it had walked past, never guessed the quiet storm in its midst. She took a sip of her coffee, savoring its warmth and simplicity, and for the briefest moment allowed herself to relax. But the discipline remained. Eyes unseen, skills unmatched, this was not just her past, it was her present, and it would define her future. Even ordinary spaces, ordinary people, ordinary lives, nothing was ever truly ordinary when she was near. The shooting range had settled back into its usual rhythm after her demonstration of skill earlier that day, but the atmosphere remained charged. Her presence lingered like an unspoken warning, invisible yet unmistakable. Other shooters cast furtive glances toward the lane she had occupied, curiosity and awe mixing with residual disbelief. Even those who had mocked her hours earlier found themselves unable to leave the lingering image of her precision behind. Among the crowd, one young man stood apart, bristling with a stubborn blend of wounded pride and lingering bravado. He had been the loudest of the mockers, the one who had dared to underestimate her the most. Now, his smirk had been replaced by determination. He would challenge her, not out of malice, necessarily, but out of ego. He needed to reclaim some sense of superiority, to prove that her skill was an anomaly, a fluke. "You think you're the best," he called, his voice carrying across the lane. "How about a little competition? Let's see if all that calm focus is really anything more than luck." Her dark sunglasses reflected his image as she looked up slowly. A faint smile touched her lips, polite and disarming, masking the flicker of interest beneath. "A challenge," she said softly. "Very well. Let's see what you've got." The room's energy shifted instantly. Other shooters leaned in, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. The instructor, clipboard forgotten, raised his eyebrows, recognizing the inevitable collision of ego and skill. The young man stepped forward confidently, loading his rifle with exaggerated care. He flexed his shoulders, stood tall, and aimed at the target downrange. "First to hit the bullseye 5 times wins," he announced, trying to sound casual but failing to mask the tension in his tone. She didn't respond verbally. Her hands worked with methodical precision, assembling her rifle and adjusting her stance. Every motion was deliberate, practiced, and smooth, betraying no hint of nervousness. Her focus was absolute, as it had always been. The first shot came from the challenger. It rang out loud, reverberating through the range, but it landed slightly off-center. He blinked, adjusted his aim, and fired again. Another miss. His confidence wavered imperceptibly. The laughter from earlier hours was gone, replaced by silent apprehension. She exhaled calmly, raised her rifle, and fired. The bullet struck dead center. A perfect hit. A hush fell over the room. The contrast between their skill, or lack thereof, was immediate and undeniable. Another round. He aimed, fired, missed again. His movements became sharper, more desperate. Every muscle in his body betrayed tension, while she remained composed, her motions precise and controlled. She fired again. Bullseye. The sound of the shot echoed like a statement, skill outweighed ego, always. The other shooters whispered among themselves, captivated by the unfolding drama. They had witnessed her precision earlier, but this head-to-head confrontation magnified it. The young man's smirk had faded completely, replaced by a growing realization, he had misjudged her. His challenge, meant to assert dominance, had become a humiliating display of incompetence. Frustration rose in him like a storm. He tried to rationalize, to blame his misses on wind, angle, or distraction, but deep down, he knew the truth. She was simply better. She had honed her focus to a level that made mistakes nearly impossible, and her calm, measured approach left him unbalanced. She fired again, this time splitting the bullseye with uncanny precision, the shot so clean it seemed almost surreal. The room collectively gasped. The instructor murmured under his breath, shaking his head in disbelief. This was no ordinary shooter. This was someone who had turned focus into an art form, whose hands and mind operated in perfect synchrony, whose presence commanded attention without a word. The young man stepped back, his pride crumbling. Okay, maybe you're good," he admitted reluctantly, his voice strained. "But let's see if you can handle moving targets." A hint of amusement flickered across her lips. "Very well," she said, her tone calm yet tinged with an edge that implied a challenge in return. She adjusted her rifle for the new task. Moving targets demanded anticipation, precision, and instinct, all qualities she had cultivated over years in environments far more hostile than a shooting range. The targets slid across the lanes, mechanical and predictable, yet difficult enough to test even skilled shooters. He fired first, but his shots were erratic, some hitting the frame, some missing entirely. Panic had replaced confidence. He could feel the tension in the room, the weight of expectation, not for him, but for her. She had become the standard, the measure by which all others would be judged. She waited, breathing evenly, observing the motion of the targets, calculating timing, distance, and trajectory. Then she fired. Each shot hit precisely where intended, slicing through the moving bullseye as if guided by some invisible hand. The rhythm was hypnotic, almost poetic. Each strike punctuated the gap between skill and assumption, experience and arrogance. The young man's shoulders slumped. How is that possible?" he muttered, his voice barely audible. The words carried more disbelief than any sentence of ridicule could. He had assumed superiority based on appearance, and that assumption had failed spectacularly. She lowered her rifle momentarily, scanning the room through her dark lenses. Eyes wide with admiration, envy, and awe met her gaze from the other lanes. She didn't smile, didn't boast. She merely exhaled and resumed the challenge, moving seamlessly from one target to another, every shot a testament to discipline and mastery. The young man attempted one final push, aiming with desperate precision, but it was too late. She had already demonstrated the truth of her skill, calm focus, experience, and mastery outclassed raw ego every time. Her shots continued to hit perfectly, leaving no room for doubt. By the end of the session, the challenge was over. The young man, defeated, could only step back and nod, humbled and quiet. The instructor, clipboard forgotten, shook his head in disbelief. Others whispered, some shaking their heads, some silently applauding. Her dominance had been proven, not through confrontation or aggression, but through the quiet, undeniable force of skill perfected over years of unseen training. She packed her rifle with meticulous care, slinging the case over her shoulder. The atmosphere of the range had shifted subtly. Where there had once been mockery, there was now respect. Where there had been disbelief, there was awe. Her presence, quiet and unassuming, had left an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed it. As she walked toward the exit, the young man lingered, staring after her with a mixture of frustration and reluctant admiration. He had underestimated her, and in that underestimation lay a lesson he would not soon forget. The room seemed to exhale collectively, as if acknowledging that the challenge had not been merely a contest, it had been a revelation. Outside, she walked calmly to her car, blending into the ordinary rhythm of the city streets. To any passerby, she was just another woman walking with purpose. Yet those who had witnessed the challenge knew better. She was far more than ordinary, a silent force, precise, disciplined, and unmatched. Even as she disappeared into the crowd, the whispers lingered, a quiet testament to the reality that appearances could deceive, and that the quietest person in the room might very well be the most lethal. The challenge had ended, but her legend was only beginning. The echoes of gunfire had faded, replaced by a hushed reverence that lingered throughout the shooting range. The other shooters had returned to their routines, yet their movements were quieter, their chatter subdued. The woman's presence had shifted the energy of the entire room. She had arrived unnoticed, performed flawlessly, and left a mark that no one could ignore. Mockery had been silenced, and what remained was respect, unspoken, earned, undeniable. The young men who had challenged her earlier were still at the lanes, slumped against the barriers, faces pale with disbelief. Pride, once their shield, had crumbled completely. They had assumed superiority based on appearances, and in doing so, had underestimated her. That mistake now weighed heavily on them. Their whispers were tinged with awe and grudging admiration. She's unbelievable," one murmured. "I didn't even know you could be that precise." She stood quietly near the exit, gathering her belongings with deliberate care. Her movements were calm and composed, but each step radiated authority. Even though she had said nothing more than necessary, every action spoke volumes. People watched her, instinctively aware that they were in the presence of someone extraordinary. The respect was not forced, it was automatic, a reaction to skill, confidence, and the quiet mastery that had left them all stunned. The range instructor approached, clipboard in hand but forgotten for the moment. He cleared his throat, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and apprehension. That was remarkable," he said, struggling to find words. "I've never seen anyone handle the rifle like that. Not with beginners, not with experts. You've earned respect, fair and square." She nodded politely, her dark sunglasses concealing the subtle smile that formed on her lips. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice was calm, measured, and quiet, yet it carried weight. It was the acknowledgement of a truth that had already been seen. She didn't need to boast, she didn't need to assert dominance. The evidence of her skill had done that for her. The men who had challenged her earlier exchanged glances. Some attempted to regain composure, standing taller as if to reclaim a shred of dignity. But they knew, deep down, that the lesson had been learned. They had been defeated, not through arrogance, but by someone whose calm, silent focus made every shot matter. Their respect was reluctant but genuine. As she slung the rifle case over her shoulder, she moved through the range with quiet purpose. Heads turned, conversations faltered, and a few shooters followed her gaze in silent observation. She didn't seek attention, and yet she commanded it effortlessly. The irony was not lost on her, those who mocked had underestimated, and those who observed had begun to admire. All without a single word of self-promotion. Her mind, however, was elsewhere. Beyond the immediate satisfaction of demonstrating skill, she thought about the discipline that had brought her here. Years of training, missions in hostile territories, and countless hours of silent observation had forged her into the person standing there. The shooting range was a small stage for what she had learned to master in life and death scenarios. Here, the consequences were minimal, but the precision remained identical. A group of younger shooters hesitated, then stepped forward cautiously. "Excuse me," one said, voice trembling slightly. Would you give us some tips? Or maybe show us how to get better?" She looked at them, her dark sunglasses reflecting their tentative faces. She paused, considering. She could teach, could demonstrate, could explain, but she chose restraint. Instead, she gave them a small nod and said softly, "Practice. Patience. Focus. That is where skill begins." The words were simple, almost mundane, but they carried weight. The younger shooters absorbed them, understanding that her mastery wasn't just in the mechanics of shooting, but in the discipline behind every action, every decision, every breath. They didn't need more explanation, the quiet authority in her presence conveyed the lesson far better than words ever could. The men who had been loudest in their mockery earlier now lingered silently nearby, unwilling to approach directly but clearly listening. Some of them began to murmur among themselves, slowly acknowledging the gap between ego and true skill. Respect, they realized, was earned, not demanded, and certainly not assumed. She moved toward the exit, each step measured, her presence commanding even as she seemed ordinary. The sunlight caught her features, softening them, yet the power in her movements remained evident. The range had been a battlefield in miniature, a contest of perception versus reality, and she had emerged not through confrontation, but through quiet, undeniable mastery. The instructor followed at a distance, shaking his head. "I've never seen anything like it," he muttered to himself. She didn't just hit targets, she changed the room. Everyone feels it. Outside, the world continued with its ordinary rhythm, cars moving through intersections, pedestrians hurrying along sidewalks, the hum of city life. Yet inside the range, the aftermath of her performance lingered. The air was thick with respect, tempered with disbelief. She had proven that appearances were deceiving, that skill often lay hidden beneath calm, unassuming surfaces, and that mastery needed no audience to validate it. She paused for a moment at her car, taking a slow breath. Even in this quiet, ordinary moment, her awareness remained sharp. Every sound, every movement, every shift in the environment registered in her mind. She had learned long ago that vigilance was not optional, it was necessary. The calm exterior was a choice, a tool, but beneath it, precision and awareness were constant companions. Sliding into the driver's seat, she allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The respect she had earned today was not fleeting, it was tangible, woven into the perceptions of everyone who had witnessed her skill. Yet she felt no need to linger in the spotlight. Recognition was irrelevant. Mastery, discipline, and quiet authority were sufficient. As she drove away, the range receded behind her, but the effect of her presence lingered. Conversations would continue, whispers would spread, and her reputation, though anonymous, would grow. The men who had mocked her had learned a lasting lesson: underestimation could be fatal, and quiet competence often concealed unmatched skill. Even in her silence, she commanded authority. Even in her ordinary appearance, she radiated mastery. Respect had been earned not through words or threats, but through unwavering focus, precision, and calm. And that was more powerful than any display of arrogance ever could be. The world outside remained oblivious, yet the ripple of her presence had extended far beyond the walls of the range. She had walked in unnoticed, performed flawlessly, and departed without fanfare. Yet those who had witnessed her would not forget. Her story was not one of showmanship or spectacle, it was one of quiet power, earned respect, and a mastery that demanded acknowledgement without ever seeking it. She parked at a small cafe, blending seamlessly with the ordinary flow of life. People passed, unaware of the lethal precision she possessed, unaware of the discipline, training, and experience that made her unassailable. To the casual observer, she was simply another woman taking a coffee break. But to those who had seen her at the range, she was something else entirely, a force to be reckoned with, silent, controlled, and utterly unmatched. Even as she sipped her coffee, her mind remained active, reviewing angles, techniques, and focus. She had earned respect, yes, but that was only a temporary acknowledgement. Mastery required continual vigilance. The world underestimated far too often, and she thrived in that ignorance, using it as both shield and advantage. The quiet respect she commanded at the range would linger, a testament to skill over ego, precision over assumptions, and mastery over mockery. And though she walked through ordinary streets, blending seamlessly with the crowd, the impact of her presence, the aura of quiet dominance, would not fade for those who had witnessed it. For the first time that day, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Respect had been earned, silence had been maintained, and the lesson had been delivered without a single shout. That was her way. That had always been her way. And in that calm, controlled, unassuming manner, she prepared herself for whatever would come next, because mastery was not a performance. It was a state of being, and it would always define her. The city outside her apartment buzzed with ordinary life. Cars hummed down the streets, pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks, the distant sound of sirens blended with the rhythm of daily chaos. To anyone watching, she was just another woman returning home after a quiet day, a black woman in a hoodie, her posture relaxed yet precise, carrying a small bag over her shoulder. But the world she inhabited was far more layered than it seemed. Behind her calm exterior lay decades of training, missions, and experiences that had honed her into a lethal sniper, feared and respected in the shadows. As she entered her apartment, she locked the door with methodical care. Each turn of the key, each click of the lock, was deliberate, rituals ingrained through years of discipline. She set down her bag, unzipped it, and removed a notebook filled with diagrams, coordinates, and notes that only someone of her expertise could understand. Her eyes scanned the pages briefly, absorbing the information as if reviewing old memories. Her mind drifted back to the earliest days of her training, back to a time when life demanded perfection. She had been recruited young, not for her strength, not for her appearance, but for her ability to focus, to observe, to remain invisible while executing precise, often deadly, actions. Her instructors had tested her relentlessly, long hours in simulations, physical endurance beyond human norms, mental exercises that blurred the line between thought and instinct. Every failure was recorded, corrected, refined. Every success was a step toward mastery, toward becoming something more than ordinary. Her first real mission had been a revelation. She had been dropped into a hostile zone under the cover of night, tasked with extracting a high-value target from a fortified compound. The operation required absolute patience. One misstep, one slight deviation from calculated timing, could have meant death, not just for her, but for the people depending on her precision. Hours stretched into a tense eternity as she lay in wait, her rifle balanced perfectly, her breathing steady, every sound in the environment catalogued and analyzed. When the moment came, her shot was instantaneous, precise, and decisive. The mission was a success, and the lesson was clear: in her world, hesitation was fatal. Years of assignments followed, each more dangerous, each more exacting than the last. She had operated in urban environments, deserts, jungles, and frozen wastelands, learning to adapt, to anticipate, to survive. Every terrain, every circumstance, every adversary had refined her skill, but it had also demanded something deeper: the ability to remain unseen, unnoticed, underestimated. That was her advantage. People assumed ordinary things about her, her calm demeanor, her unassuming appearance, but those assumptions were weapons she wielded silently. She remembered one particular mission vividly, a mission that had tested not only her skill but her discipline. She had been tasked with eliminating a high-profile threat from a rooftop hundreds of meters away, in a bustling city where civilians were everywhere. The slightest error could have resulted in disaster. For hours, she observed, calculated, waited. Her finger hovered over the trigger for minutes that felt like hours. Then, with absolute precision, she fired. One shot, one outcome, perfect execution. She exfiltrated unnoticed, leaving the chaos intact, but her mission accomplished flawlessly. That was the essence of her power, invisibility and control. Back in her apartment, she reviewed old photographs, images from missions long completed, targets neutralized, scenarios that no civilian could ever understand. To the world, these were just images, fragments of a hidden life. But to her, they were reminders of the discipline that defined her existence. She had learned early on that skill without restraint could be dangerous, that arrogance was a weakness, and that true mastery demanded silence as much as precision. Her rifle, now safely stored in a reinforced case, sat in the corner of the room. She ran her fingers over its smooth surface, feeling the balance, the weight, the alignment that she had come to know as an extension of her body. Every weapon she handled was an instrument, every shot a deliberate act of calculation. Her calm, quiet exterior was not an illusion, it was the necessary shell around decades of lethal expertise. Even in civilian life, the lessons of her past remained. Walking through streets, shopping in stores, sipping coffee in a cafe, each movement was conscious, aware, controlled. She observed details that others overlooked, patterns of movement, the subtleties of human behavior, the potential threats hidden in plain sight. Her skills were not dormant, they were merely invisible, waiting for moments when precision, focus, and discretion were required. She glanced out the window at the fading light of day. The city continued its oblivious rhythm, unaware of the lethal capability that had passed through it, unassuming and silent. Her presence at the shooting range earlier that day was a small rehearsal, a reminder to herself that the skills honed over decades were not forgotten, not rusty, not diminished by time. In that space, she had demonstrated to others, and to herself, that mastery did not depend on recognition. It depended on control, discipline, and the quiet knowledge of one's own ability. Memories of mentors and colleagues came to her mind, those who had taught her the intricacies of long-range targeting, fieldcraft, and the psychology of anticipation. She had worked with teams, yet often alone, entrusted with missions that required complete self-reliance. Each success had built her reputation in covert circles, though in the civilian world, she remained invisible. That duality defined her existence, seen by few, underestimated by many, lethal when circumstances demanded. She poured herself a cup of tea, the ritual calm and mundane, yet even this small act carried precision. She measured the water, the tea leaves, the steeping time, all with subconscious accuracy that mirrored her sniper discipline. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to relax, to inhabit ordinary life without the constant calculations of threat assessment. But even in that small reprieve, the shadows of her past lingered. Her phone remained silent, notifications from unknown contacts ignored. Occasionally, there were messages from old colleagues, updates on situations she had long left behind, but she chose her engagements carefully. Visibility, exposure, ego, these were variables she managed meticulously. Her life was a balance of public invisibility and private mastery, a duality few could comprehend. As night fell, she retrieved a small journal, opening it to pages filled with meticulous notes, calculations, coordinates, reflections on missions, reminders of focus and patience. Each entry was a testament to the discipline that had carried her through perilous circumstances, the awareness that every decision, every movement, every breath mattered. She wrote briefly, then set the pen down, reflecting on how far she had come from the young recruit who had first learned to wait, to aim, to strike with unerring precision. The city beyond her window glowed with artificial light, alive and indifferent to the quiet storm within her apartment. Shadows danced across the walls as she prepared for a night of solitary reflection. She knew her life was not ordinary, her experiences not relatable, and her skills not to be underestimated. The quiet black woman the world saw was only a fraction of her reality. Beneath the calm exterior lay decades of lethal expertise, honed through missions, training, and survival in extreme. The city had returned to its usual rhythm, unaware that something extraordinary had walked its streets earlier that day. The shooting range hummed with activity, but whispers of the quiet black woman who had dominated every challenge persisted. Her presence had created ripples that stretched beyond the walls of the facility, reaching ears and eyes she would never personally encounter. It was a legend, not one she cultivated, but one that grew silently, like shadows stretching at dusk. News traveled slowly, initially contained to the range itself. Those who had witnessed her skill replayed the events in their minds, recounting the perfection of each shot, the calm precision, the undeniable mastery. "She didn't just hit the bullseye," one said quietly, as if saying it too loudly would shatter the memory. "She owned the entire range. Every move, every breath, perfect." Word spread beyond casual whispers. Local shooting clubs and competitive shooters began to hear the story, curiosity growing with every retelling. They spoke of her calm demeanor, the way she appeared almost invisible, her quiet authority, and most importantly, her lethal precision. People speculated, some admired, others doubted, but no one who had actually seen her could dispute the truth. She had performed flawlessly, with the kind of skill that few could even imagine. Meanwhile, she lived her life unchanged. Ordinary in appearance, ordinary in routine, yet extraordinary in essence. She returned to her daily rhythm, coffee in the morning, walks through familiar streets, trips to the grocery store, time spent observing, calculating, and reflecting. Her ordinary existence was a camouflage, allowing her to move unnoticed even as the legend of her skill expanded. That balance between visibility and invisibility was a principle she had mastered long ago. Inside her apartment, she reviewed notes and sketches from her previous missions, mapping patterns, angles, and strategies. It was habitual, almost meditative. Her mind never rested, constantly refining, assessing, and preparing. While the world outside speculated and whispered, she focused on mastery, her own training and preparation never allowing complacency. Every day was a rehearsal, every moment an opportunity to hone instincts honed over years of covert operations. The legend, however, began to attract attention from more than just casual observers. Competitive shooters sought her out, hoping to challenge, learn, or merely witness her skill. Intelligence circles murmured about an operative whose abilities had manifested so flawlessly in civilian environments that she was becoming something of a myth, a figure both feared and revered. Yet she remained elusive. Invitations, challenges, and inquiries came and went, but she accepted none. The mystique grew naturally, the silence reinforcing the perception that she was untouchable, enigmatic, and unapproachable. Even at the range, those who had underestimated her earlier remained cautious. Some returned, hoping to see her again, to test her, to reclaim a sense of superiority. But she was rarely present. And when she was, she did not seek attention, did not flaunt skill, did not perform. Her abilities were quiet, precise, lethal, but displayed only when necessary, never for spectacle. It was the rarity of her presence, combined with the flawless execution of skill, that made her legend grow organically, like a shadow stretching farther than its source. Local media began to pick up rumors, recounting tales of a mysterious shooter whose precision bordered on the impossible. Respect quietly enforced. Observation alone was enough, she needed no words, no demonstrations. Her skill spoke for her, a silent force that commanded awareness. Her history, though largely unknown to those who observed her casually, was etched into her every movement. Years in the field had taught her that patience, observation, and timing were as crucial as physical ability. Every mission had reinforced discipline, every failure had refined instinct, and every success had solidified confidence. Her precision was the product of this cumulative experience, a skill unmatched and silently formidable. Across the city, stories circulated. They spoke of a sniper whose calm exterior betrayed lethal proficiency, a woman whose quiet demeanor masked unmatched skill, whose presence shifted the dynamics of any space she occupied. Speculation ranged from admiration to disbelief, but each account reinforced the truth. Her legend was real. And yet, she remained invisible, her life ordinary in appearance, extraordinary in reality. Even those who attempted to document her, to track her movements, or to challenge her, found themselves humbled. Her strategy was always the same: move unnoticed, perform when necessary, remain calm and precise. The world could speculate about her origins, her training, her past, but the truth was hers alone. The legend grew, quiet yet pervasive, a shadow in the minds of those who had glimpsed her capabilities. As night fell over the city, she returned to her apartment, lights dimmed, the streets below alive yet unaware. She poured a cup of tea, settled by the window, and reflected. The day had passed, another rehearsal in the quiet demonstration of mastery. Respect had been earned, silence maintained, and the legend quietly grew. And yet, in her solitude, she knew that her story was far from over. The world might underestimate, doubt, or mock, but skill, patience, and discipline always prevailed. Her eyes scanned the cityscape, dark and reflective behind. Sunglasses indoors, though unnecessary to conceal her thoughts. She had become a force that moved unseen, a legend whispered in private conversations, a figure whose calm exterior belied lethal capacity. Her journey was far from complete, her mastery constantly evolving, and the world, oblivious as it might be, would one day confront the full extent of her skill. For now, she remained invisible to most, observed only by those whose paths intersected with her fleeting presence. The legend grew quietly, organically, unstoppable and undeniable. And within the quiet of her apartment, she allowed herself a brief, private acknowledgement of what she had become, not just a sniper, not just a master, but a living embodiment of precision, patience, and lethal grace. The shadows of her past and the quiet respect she commanded merged seamlessly, crafting a narrative of excellence that would extend beyond immediate memory. Eyes unseen, skills unmatched, legend quietly growing, this was her truth. And though the city slept unaware, the world had begun to remember her, silently and irrevocably.